Hello, my name's Andy. I'm the Ginger Pondkeeper. Welcome to episode 113. As I've spoken about quite a few times on the channel, I don't have fish that could be considered show fish, nor, more importantly, do I want fish like that. I have and want fish that replicate those you'd find in real lakes and waterways, with all the imperfections, beauty and character that they have. In fact, I find perfection, whether that's in terms of shape or patterns or coloration, less interesting than, say, non-symmetrical scale patterns or the odd, healthily healed, obviously, abrasions or even a missing fin. Iteration 1 of my stocking included a mirror carp without one of its pelvic fins, and it was no less important to me and generally valued because of that. Which would all seem to make me one of the less likely pond keepers to carry out what are, at least on the face of it, cosmetic treatments on one of my fish. So why, over the last few weeks, have I twice netted my common carp and completed such treatment? And, I suppose, if I'm going to explain that, I may as well also detail how I went about it, and, probably more interestingly, how well it worked. The why is simplistically answered by saying that I did it for reasons other than cosmetic ones, but that's not completely true, as although there were health and well-being reasons for doing it, looks did play a part in my decision. I guess it would be more accurate to say that I didn't and wouldn't have only done it for cosmetic aspirations. So, to more fully answer why, some background. The carp in question is the newest fish in my pond and coincidentally the biggest. She's a common carp that I received towards the end of February this year at a length of 67 centimetres and a weight of 13.5 pounds, which I mention not as some kind of humble brag, but because its size is somewhat a risk factor in sustaining the kind of injury it did during the inevitable netting and transporting fish go through when people like me buy them. So, background to the background, a carp is a fish, fish have fins, fish have different... Nope, I can do this better. It's an episode, not a vlog for heaven's sake. Right, carp are indeed fish, and fish definitely do have fins. In a carp's case, they have a pair of pectoral fins, a pair of pelvic or ventral fins, an anal fin, a tail or caudal fin, and a dorsal fin. Each type of fin has a similar structure. In the case of pectoral fins specifically, it comprises 14 bony fins or rays. The front, largest ray is called the dorsal leading ray. In between is a scalous membrane of skin. Pectoral fins aid carp in three-dimensional movement, e.g. turning left or right, vertical positioning and forwards or backwards movement. They also help in slowing the fish down, either when in a current or from its own momentum. Overall, pectoral fins play a massively important role in carp movement. Therefore, when it was obvious that my new carp had a torn pectoral fin at the dorsal leading ray, it was somewhat more important than if there was a similar tear or other damage on one of the other fins. One of the two Iteration 2 carp had a similar tear on its dorsal fin, but that had a much smaller effect on its motion and therefore was predominantly an aesthetic problem. In addition, over several weeks it began to heal by itself, and after some months the tear had fully repaired. Based a bit on this, and in spite of it being a more significant tear in a fin with a greater range of movement and with a greater role in a carp's overall locomotion, my first approach was to leave well alone, wait and see, and somewhat hope that it began to self-repair. However, given a few weeks and a lot of wishful thinking, there was no improvement. Subjectively, I felt if anything it had gotten worse, as well as developing signs of irritation, if not infection, as the area where the leading dorsal ray met the body had developed red patches. So, my slightly head in the sand approach was not really viable any longer. I had two important reasons to address it more actively: the negative effect on the carp's movement and the potential irritation around the base of the fin. both potentially caused by the strain placed upon each part of the fin as the carp swam around its environment and attempted to use the fin. As I said, the third, less important reason for attempting to repair the fin was the obvious and significant effect it had on the fish's appearance. Again, on its own, this would have been unlikely to have made me seek out and complete some sort of treatment, but taken as another reason alongside the two health concerns just made the need for action all the greater. So what to do? A quick and not particularly robust bit of Googling turned up two options: suturing or supergluing, and a third really, which is doing both. After that speed researching, I left some messages around for some advice at various places online, all of which gave me some useful tips and pointers, and after tracking down every bit of info, forum posts, YouTube videos, photos and more besides, I decided that my approach would be suturing. The thing is, as I may have mentioned, I'm a nurse. Not the branch of nursing that works in hospitals, but a nurse nonetheless. However, I've never had the need or training to complete suturing, so I felt it prudent to do some learning and practicing. Therefore, I obviously turned to YouTube again to get the basics, but before I could test my dexterity and find out whether I could have been a surgeon if only I'd worked harder in school, I had to get some equipment. Now, there's lots of ways you can use pretty basic suturing needles and thread, and you don't need to buy particularly sophisticated or expensive versions. What's most important, at least from the sources I read, is to get curved needles, although there were a number of sources that use fairly standard straight needles successfully too. I'll say at this point that this is one of those situations where I am not remotely qualified to offer advice or guidance. I felt at this stage of the process that the depth and quality of information out there wasn't really that strong, and what there was, while helpful, missed a couple of key aspects that would have helped me feel more prepared. This would be firstly some real guidance and explanation of at what points to suture, e.g. where on the fin and raise, and secondly some troubleshooting information, some what to do if type stuff. Anyway, I'm getting a bit sidetracked. I bought some curved needles, as fine a grade as were within my budget, each coming with thread attached. They were really pretty cheap to be honest, so no bank-breaking cost. All the equipment in fact I had to buy totalled half what I'd spend on parasite treatment for example, so pretty reasonable. Within that cost I also bought a suturing kit including needle holders, forceps and scissors. I snagged a training set from eBay, and again, this was actually much cheaper than you'd expect. I then saw some training videos from YouTube, made a practice fin out of some of the plastic packaging the kits arrived in, and then spent a good few days following the videos and getting my best Dr. Murphy surgical skills perfected. Of course, and this will be super relevant later, plastic packaging doesn't move, sedated or not. It also isn't fragile like skin, and it's super dry. So while this enabled me to perfect the basic mechanics of suturing, it wasn't necessarily a real-world replication, something to ponder on. Another new approach I had to employ was sedation. Although I've done a fair few topical treatments on my fish before, I've never felt the need to sedate them to do it. By and large, my opinion is that you should only sedate when absolutely necessary. So cleaning and treating a wound, unless close to eyes or gills, doesn't really need the fish sedated. But suturing a fin, requiring the fish to be as still as possible, both for safety and the success of the process, I think is clearly in the necessary category. Luckily, I already had some, as it was part of a koi first aid kit I bought a while back, and was still safely in date. Plus, it didn't really need any learning or practice, unlike suturing, just a read up on dosage and some maths related to the volume of the tub I would be sedating the carp in. So, tools bought, treatment sourced, skills practiced, and it was time to actually do it. I've got to admit I was a little nervous, not because of sedation or even suturing, but because I have a really bad track record of doing anything, DIY, exercises, or even something simple like water tests, pretty badly the first time I do it. I'll usually mess something up. The solution, or at least an approach to reduce the risks of messing up too badly, is to be super organised and plan everything out. So I made a list and pictured everything, making a written step-by-step guide of what I was going to do. What doesn't help, and most YouTubers will probably recognise this, is filming it all too. Not just because of not wanting to mess up on camera, but due to all the mental energy that planning shots, getting angles, even just remembering to turn the camera on, etc. can take, and consequently how it can distract you from what you're actually doing. I address this in a couple of ways. Firstly, by using more than one camera. I use my GoPro, an old iPhone and my current iPhone and set them up to cover all the tasks I was going to complete, so I didn't need to think about doing it during the procedure. I also made a conscious decision not to film everything. For instance, I didn't record me netting the fish, again reducing the amount of extraneous things I'd have to think about. Secondly, I decided I wasn't going to talk it through as I did it, and instead to do voiceover later on, the one obviously that you're listening to now, as it removes yet another thing to concentrate on and just allows me to focus on what I was doing. Right, onto the procedure itself. To start with, I did actually bring something from my job to help me, and that was the practice of laying everything out I'd need in arm's reach, in the order I'd need them, and ready to use with the minimum of fuss, e.g. a bottle not in its cardboard box for instance. It's a really important habit to get into, not only so you don't have to leave the fish if you forget something, but just so the process will go more smoothly and you're less likely to go wrong. Before netting the fish, I filled the tub with 50 litres of water and added the stated dose of koi carp and mixed it in thoroughly. I then netted the carp, which, considering the plant growth and the common carp's instinctive distrust, went pretty well. I don't use my large koi net as I find it difficult in my pond, and instead use a fishing landing net with a soft net. It's perfect for my mirror carp, but a little small for the common. It all went well, however, and I then moved the carp to the tub and gave the sedation time to work, which is when we arrive at the first moment of uncertainty, if not an outright actual problem. I gave it a long time, checking the carp, seeing if she began to appear sedated, rolling over, etc., or at least not righting itself completely when I rolled her. But she didn't appear to change much as time went on. Surprisingly, she was pretty calm as soon as I put her in there, and this changed very little over about 15 minutes. All the info I read suggested it would work much more quickly, so, maybe not that wisely, I added some more koi carp to an amount totalling about 1.5 the dose suggested. Again, no real change. Therefore, I went with starting the procedure proper, as one, I didn't really think leaving the carp in a larger dose for too long was a good idea, and two, I didn't want to continue to place her under stress with the suturing still to come for much longer, however calm she appeared on the outside. So, I moved her onto the padded unhooking mat and set to work. Fairly quickly, I realised how different suturing the fin would be compared to my dummy plastic version. I mean, I guess I should have predicted that, but it was still somewhat of an impact. The other initial challenge was a difficulty in my plan to suture finely, by which I mean close to the edge of the main body of the fin and the leading ray. My thinking, probably incorrectly, was that I would potentially cause less damage and get a cleaner result. In reality, the structure of both parts meant this actually caused small micro tears, and it was difficult to get a robust fixing to work, especially with the leading ray. If I ever did this again, I would eschew any pretense of that and adopt wider stitches from the start. The next problem that revealed itself was the biggest and made everything that much more difficult. The carp, though a little sedated, was not nearly sedated enough, and its occasional movements and flipping made the procedure both harder and more risky. Eventually, I called on my son, who has been carp fishing and is fairly confident handling fish, to come and hold her, and I then relatively quickly finished the sutures. Not at all to my satisfaction, and I was less than confident that they were secure enough. I was also worried about any small damage I may have caused, as well as the irritation I had seen prior to deciding on completing the suturing. As a result, I applied wound care and seal topical treatments to the parts of the fin I'd stitched and the irritated area. To return the carp to the pond, I decided it would be easier to get in the pond with it. In fact, I already had my waders on, be prepared, and keep her in the sling section of the unhooking mat while she recovered. I therefore kept the carp by the outlets and the air disc and just floated her until she seemed ready. This didn't take too long, maybe 10 minutes, and once released she headed to the bottom of the pond and the shadier corner. Over the next few days, a couple of things were noticeable. The carp was fine, no issues, either health or stress related. The red areas of irritation and the suture areas themselves were looking healthy and problem free, but the fin itself looked little or no different. As days turned to a couple of weeks, it was clear that my first attempt at fish surgery had gone about as successfully as I'd expected. As I said, my first attempts at new tasks tend to be a bit rubbish. So, what to do? I could leave it alone, try suturing again, or go to gluing instead. The advantage of gluing is I felt I could get it done without sedation and with far less risk of making things worse. It was also pretty cheap. Many people use ordinary superglue, which costs less than a £5, and even the medical grade version many others use, myself included, comes in under a £10. Anyway, I gave the fish another couple of weeks, 4 weeks in total, and netted her once again. As I said, this time no sedation. So I put her straight onto the padded unhooking mat and roped in my son again to hold her, which all in all made it, nearly sticking my fingers together aside, a lot easier and stress-free. The complication with gluing is, as my fingers would attest, ensuring that it goes where and only where you want it to. Simple when gluing dry items together, a little trickier on a living creature that lives in water, in spite of how well I dried the fin parts first. The other complication is that although the glue cures quickly and is relatively waterproof, putting the fish back in the water too soon may well compromise its efficacy, and although carp can cope with being out of the water for a reasonable amount of time, it's best avoided really. So I followed a somewhat middle ground period of time keeping her out, probably not long enough for the glue and probably not great for the fish. Anyway, she returned with no issues, aside from feeling a little sorry for herself and having another reason to not entirely trust me. After a few more weeks of observing her and watching her movements and how the fin has healed, I've had chance to really evaluate both procedures and whether they'd helped, at least to some degree, with the 3 reasons I started all this for in the first place. So, to judge it all, I'm going to take each of those reasons in turn and see whether I've improved things or not. I'll start with my worries that the site of the tear was looking irritated and sore due to the size and position of the split, and the pressures placed upon it as the carp attempted to use it as normal. This was pretty much cured, for want of a better word, after the first procedure, not because of the sutures, but because of the wound treatment and seal I applied when completing them. I've used both before on minor and more significant abrasions, and it's always worked not only completely, but also really quickly when the fish have needed some help with healing. And although you'll know if you've watched my vlogs, I'm loath to recommend items that I've not thoroughly studied, I am so far really happy with these wound treatments and generally pleasantly surprised by their efficacy. I think they deserve their own video with a closer look at them. I'm building a list of video ideas and they are definitely on it. On to the next reason, which is, as I said, the least important, and that's how the fin looks. Now, on the face of it, neither procedure worked completely, as they failed to fully reattach the leading dorsal ray to the main fin. However, the second attempt did significantly improve matters, with maybe a third of the ray now attached, and this affects the looks of the fin in 2 ways. Firstly, when at rest, where the 2 parts of the fin look somewhat better but still clearly damaged, and as a result the procedures haven't really worked completely. But it's at movement that things have actually improved. With the small attachment, there is now a greater synchronicity between each part, and as a result how they look is greatly improved, and subjectively at least, the fin at movement looks somehow less damaged. However, that small attachment has had a greater effect than just aesthetics, which brings us on to the third and most important reason for carrying out these procedures. As I discussed at the start of this episode, one of my main concerns was how the damage to the fin impacted the fish's mobility, especially considering how significant pectoral fins are in that regard. While the fin is clearly not fully fixed, the small increase in attachment, which looks better in motion, has also clearly improved the function of the fin. The movement and effectiveness of that movement appears, and is only in appearance, I've no objective way of measuring it, so much better. Whether greater improvement could be achieved by a more complete attachment is, while logically true, unclear. But that does bring me to my final thoughts, which are, what, if anything, will I do next? So, with all medical procedures, there's a risk-benefit equation to consider, which means you base a decision to carry it out on the likely positive and negative outcomes and decide if the positives mean it's worth risking the negatives. So, my options are as follows: repeat the suturing, repeat the gluing, do both in one go, or do nothing. The risks are as follows. For any of the procedures, I'd need to net the fish. Netting has risks, including damaging fins, which is the reason I'm doing all this in the first place. Removing the fish from the pond also has risks, both in handling the fish, chance of injury, physical outcomes, and in terms of the stress placed upon it. As I discussed in episode 70, psychological stress can impact a carp's physical health, and while it tends to be long-term stress rather than short-term stress that has a greater impact, a basic tenet of keeping animals is to reduce stress, and only directly cause it when you really have no choice. Equally, I have to really work at building trust with my carp, and netting them doesn't help in this regard. Other risks are more directly related to the procedures, so sedation. Although sedating carp with treatments like koi calm appears quite consistently safe, no sedation comes without risk. Suturing, a clumsy learner like myself can always cause damage as well as repair it, and I am definitely a clumsy learner. Glue, again without real care and some luck, for instance the fish not moving as you do it, there's always the chance of glue getting where you don't want it, and pectoral fins are not far from the gills after all. The positives are, well, there's only one really, even more improved function of the fin. The soreness has gone, and I'm not concerned enough by how it looks to carry out any kind of procedure, so function is the only gain really. So what am I going to do? In all honesty, I just don't know. As I said, I tend to be awful when I first do any task, so the chances are I'd be less rubbish next time, and the outcome is more likely to be better as a result. I definitely do larger, as in wider sutures, which would both be easier to do and more secure. I'd probably use sutures and glue at the same time. I'd sedate again and rope in my son as well, right from the start. Additionally, if I am going to do it, I'd do it next February or so, when I plan to net the fish anyway, thereby reducing the number of risks involved. Which all means I think I could improve the fin further, but I still have doubts about whether it's worth doing. As I said at the start, my fish are not show fish, and it's function and health that motivates me, not aesthetics. In deciding what to do, I'll spend the next few months observing the fish and assessing whether the fin remains as attached as it is now. There's always the chance it will split further again, and see if the improved function remains as a result. I doubt very much things will get better, so stability is the goal really. If I'm worried about it in any way, then I may well complete the twin procedures again. If not, as things stand, I'll probably leave it be from now on. I am a little disappointed that I didn't do a better job first time, but I would have somehow predicted that. I was really motivated to help the carp and make things better for her, and I've only partially succeeded at best in that regard. Anyway, you live and learn, and I've definitely not made things worse, so that's almost a win. Thanks very much for watching this episode of the Ginger Pondkeeper, I really do appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, please comment to share your experiences, your opinion and your questions. Please also share, and if you've not already, please consider subscribing. I'm on the road to 1,000, and at the time of making this episode, I'm at 935, which means I have just 65 to go. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.